moving on to all right, we're gonna cover protection of species. First off, I mean just both. Like you want to protect, or you want, or actually not protection of species. First of all, you want to
The
classify the
listing of
Sasquatch.
Sasquatch under the ESA. I want the God Squad of the Interior Department to reveal to the American people that Sasquatch is a real species. I had an encounter with one myself, a former president, one of our greatest presidents, Theodore Roosevelt, did too. So Sasquatch exists. We have the genetic data that was recently released by Dr. Melba Ketchum of the investigation that David Paulides organized, in which three major genetic laboratories certified her findings that Sasquatch has matrilineal DNA that's modern human and patrilineal DNA from some unknown primate, which means that Sasquatch have the same genetic endowment from their mothers that we get. And yet we have stories on radio and in the Sasquatch research community of even infant Sasquatch being shot to death as if they're wild animals. I had an encounter with two Sasquatch, about a 40-year-old father and his roughly 5-year-old son, where they were so human-looking and acting that as a 5-year-old, really almost 5-year-old, I was 4 years and 11 months old, they didn't even frighten me. I know that Sasquatch exists because I've encountered Sasquatch, and I'm not shading my truth campaign or my truth policy as a presidential candidate to be popular or to avoid ridicule. I'm trying to use government to serve higher ends, to fashion a good society. Mm-hmm. And a good society is one in which humans and other primates that share our genetic endowment are not killed. That's genocide. Mm-hmm. So I included, even though I knew it was going to be controversial and I knew it was going to be grist for satire, I kept the Sasquatch proposal at the insistence of my chief of staff, Karen Kinnison, because we agreed that Sasquatch exists. The Sasquatch are being killed. They're not protected as an endangered species, and they're also not protected under our statutes, our criminal code that we use to protect humans. So they're kind of in this legal limbo where they are jeopardized by us as fellow primates. And that's just despicable. It's despicable for us as sort of more facile, more modern primates or humanoids, whatever, to be butchering them in the woods. How sick.
So
we decided to keep it in, even though it subjects me to ridicule, because it's the right thing to urge. Now that we have Melba Ketchum's genetic study, we know genetically what Sasquatch is. Mm. In fact, the ones that I encountered had the type 2 physiognomy in their face. That's right there on YouTube when you put in 4 types of Sasquatch. That drawing of that type 2 Sasquatch literally looks like the 2 Sasquatch that I encountered. Mm. It looks like it was drawn from life, in other words, of the 2 that I encountered. So that means whoever was informing that artist knew what they were talking about because they had met Sasquatch or seen Sasquatch.
So as a protected species, would that mean no experimentation, no captivity, or just...
Well, under the ESA, there's a host of there's a list of things that you can't do to an endangered or threatened species, and it's in the Endangered Species Act. Mm-hmm. One of the things you can't do is take that species, which is hunter language for killing, mm-hmm. taking it from its natural state of life and killing it and taking it as a trophy. Okay, you can't harass, you can't destroy the critical habitat, etc. So teams couldn't chase Sasquatch. They would need permission from the Department of Interior to study them, to enter their habitat and study them or try to communicate with them. From everything I've learned, excuse me, Sasquatch is not responsible for the deaths and disappearances of people in North America. Another species is. And I don't talk about that because it hasn't been proved to me that it exists. I have never met it, the so-called dogmen. But Sasquatch I know exists because I encountered it. I encountered it as a naive child with no preconceptions that it didn't exist. And I encountered it at very close range. I mean, I literally walked past that Sasquatch and his young son, that adult male Sasquatch and his young son, like you would walk past anybody to go into a restroom before them, to go into an outhouse before them. I was probably 3 feet away from them as I walked past them. Huh?
Where was this encounter again?
We used to vacation when I was a very young child. I was born in 61, so in 1964 or 5, 6, 7, we were vacationing every summer at Lake Sacandaga. That's Sacandaga, which is just a very kind of nice lake in the Adirondacks mountain range in upper New York State. And this was the first time I caught at the outhouse by myself. I was really small. I was 4 going on age 5 that fall. And I used to be afraid of using the outhouse, as a little boy. And so this was the first time I just got up the gumption to walk up to the outhouse by myself from our campsite. And as I approached the outhouse, there was an adult male and a child Sasquatch standing on the left side of the 2 outhouses. And I thought he was looking like through the outhouse. But I think he was actually using the outhouses as a blind, because we know that Sasquatch engages in what's called tree peeking, where they use a large tree as a blind to be physically masked as they're observing something in the woods. As I walked up to them, I said, "Do you want to go in?" And they didn't do anything. They didn't say anything. So I just walked in, did my business. And when I came out of the outhouse, they were standing looking at the outhouse I had entered. I had walked within 3 feet of them as I walked into the outhouse. They were standing right there on the left side of the outhouse. The father closer to the outhouse, the father was maybe 3 feet from the outhouse, and his son was maybe 8 feet. Then when I came out, they were literally looking at me. The adult male was on my right, the child was on my left, and when I stepped down the little stairwell out of the outhouse and as I was reaching their level, the father stuck out his right hand with his palm up as if to gesture, "Look, this is my son, he's your age," or, "This is my son, look, he's your age. You should play with him when you're here." He was like introducing me to his son. It was my age or my size, right?
Mm.
And because they were funny-looking humans all covered in hair with no clothes on, kind of a cross between a human being and an ape, they kind of looked like what Planet of the Apes that had just been released around that time, 1967. Actually, let me check that. I'm not sure that Planet of the Apes had been released yet. Well, I certainly encountered animated apes like Curious George, the children's book.
Sure.
So since they looked like hairy humans that had an ape-like quality, I didn't want to interact with his son, and I just walked past his son and walked back to the campsite. As I did, they peeled over to the right and walked up a grassy swale, a little hillock there near the outhouse, and up and out of view. But before doing so, the adult looked back at me very slowly. He had almost perfect control of his motion, and he looked back at me very slowly as if to see, well, how is this boy responding to my presence? So that was so early in my childhood that for years I was saying to people, when Bigfoot would come up, I would say something like, I've driven from LA to Seattle probably 20 times, and I've never seen anything. I've never seen anything in the California woods, the Oregon woods, or the Washington State woods as I've been driving from LA to Seattle. If Sasquatch existed, then I would have seen something, because I'm very observant when I'm driving. But in fact, I'd had a close encounter with 2 Sasquatch. That shows you how human memory is fallible.
Mm.
So since I had an encounter with the actual Sasquatch, which I think probably had nothing to do with my time travel experiences, just probably coincidental. They were probably there, and they saw that a child was coming, a small child, so they weren't startled. They just stayed there rather than run into the woods at high speed. The Sasquatch apparently can run at 120 miles per hour, according to one sighting near Holloman Air Force Base in New Mexico, where they were being tracked by a helicopter as they were running away from the helicopter. They got up to 120 miles per hour on foot. That's fast.
Yeah.
But so at least the adults can run very fast where they're almost a blur, or they are a blur to us. So they just stayed there, and he was just peering past the outhouse. So since I encountered them in my investigation, I learned that a young Theodore Roosevelt had an encounter, an adult Theodore Roosevelt had an encounter with an adult Sasquatch when he was looking for Sasquatch in his Great North American Ape Expedition. I thought, well, listen, the whole public discussion of Sasquatch almost 100 years after the death of TR is still going on with no moral compunction about the fact that some people are occasionally killing a Sasquatch with impunity, maybe with a lot of guilt that they've killed an advanced primate that's like us, but with impunity. So my decision, which is based on morality, is that because Sasquatch are not only advanced primates, but primates who apparently present no threat to us, we should protect them by using the full protection available under the Endangered Species Act.
What do you imagine is happening with the Sasquatch that is being killed?
Well, I mean, because we didn't evolve, Theodore Roosevelt lived from 1858 to 1919, right?
Mm-hmm.
My grandfather was only 18 through most of 1919, right? And I'm 54. So we've had like 3 generations of Americans who have failed to protect Sasquatch. We know he exists. So what's going on is we are so socially retarded as a country. Don't use the phrase retarded because people think I'm referring to the mentally retarded.
I know.
We are so socially, you don't, yeah. We are so socially regressive as a civilization, as a government, as a people, that we haven't acted to protect a higher primate that shares traits with us. In 3 generations since a president served, in 100 years since a president served who as a younger man encountered Sasquatch just as I did when I was a kid. Okay, that's pathetic. That's something that we should be ashamed about as a country. So I think what's going on is occasionally a hunter or a Bigfoot hunter is literally trying to kill Sasquatch either because they think they're a big hairy beast that they can be killed just like you can kill a deer or an elk, or they think that their life is in danger and they have to kill the Sasquatch, or they're trying to kill the Sasquatch as a hunting prize to bring it in and prove the existence of the species, or as a hunting prize per se. All of those reasons are not legitimate when you're talking about genocide. And when I use the phrase genocide, I'm emphasizing the stem gene. Mm-hmm. The Sasquatches share our mother-provided genetic heritage. Mm-hmm. They share common ancestry with us. We now know that as a scientific finding. And so I believe that we're morally compelled to protect Sasquatch with the same level of moral duty and compunction as we do when we outlaw first-degree murder of human beings or injuring a human being with an unauthorized use of lethal force. I mean, we have a use of force doctrine that says you can only use lethal force to kill or injure another human being to prevent the murder of you or somebody else, the grievous bodily harm of you or somebody else, or the sexual assault of you or somebody else. And then there's the exception for fleeing felon. Anybody can fire at a fleeing felon to enforce the criminal code. Mm-hmm. So we have a very restrictive use of force doctrine that is only violated in addition to those standards when we declare war. We then make mass murder legally sanctioned. But beyond those exceptions, we outlaw not just killing other human beings, but using lethal force to injure them. And yet, regularly, Sasquatch, at least maybe not often, but more times than we would want to admit, Sasquatch apparently are being shot at by Bigfoot hunters, trophy seekers, and so forth. And that is just immoral. It's as immoral as making genocide against a specific ethnic group legal and sanctioned. It's genocide per se.
I understand the morality situation, but my question from the skeptic's point of view is, where is a specimen? Why don't we have one?
Well, I think we don't have one because their population is probably small. But by the way, we have photographic evidence of dead Sasquatch. Some photographs of which go back over 100 years. So we do have historical archival evidence of very large primates that are humanoid in their form being taken as hunting prizes when the woods occupied much more of the North American continent. You know, when the white man got to North America, it was 90 to 95% forested.
Mm.
And now it's only 10% forested, although tree cover has been actually increasing since the Garden Society started promoting tree planting, such as the National Arbor Society in the 1920s, the garden clubs, the National Arbor Society, and so forth. So we actually, one of the reasons there's an allergy problem in our generation from tree pollen is that we've actually been reforesting America by planting more trees, both urban and rural tree plantings. So that's actually a good trend.
But what do you think? Like, do you believe that the hunters are just keeping them as trophies and not?
No. I believe that Sasquatch is not that numerous. It's very fast and very sensitive. It's very intelligent, so it's able to evade us. It's able to evade, for the most part, being photographed or killed by us. But there are known archival photographs of Sasquatch hunting prizes that were taken, and we have to be cognizant of the fact that firsthand testimony as to what people did or what they saw comes in as direct evidence, not as hearsay. And it doesn't have to be with any exception to the rule against hearsay to come in as direct evidence. So, for example, if there was going to be a public trial as to whether Sasquatch exists, my testimony from what I saw and experienced and my interaction with Sasquatch at Lake Sakadaga in August of 1966 or thereabouts would come in as direct evidence. So when you say, what is your evidence? The evidence of my own damn eyes.
Right. But
so that comes in as direct evidence. I saw and I interacted with Sasquatch.
I mean, you definitely,
just like I could say I went to Europe and interacted with a Briton or a Frenchman.
Right.
I can say I interacted with a Sasquatch.
But I mean, you definitely understand the desire for a specimen, you know?
I understand the desire for a specimen because the ultimate proof of the existence of a species would be an irrefutable living or dead example of that biological form.
Right.
So as a scientific construct, I agree with that form of, Linnaean classification of known animals. But from a legal and a policy perspective, I don't require that because we have the firsthand testimony. I mean, look, if we had testimony that the Kurds were being genocided by Saddam Hussein, we would even launch a military action to protect the Kurds, and we toppled Saddam Hussein without necessarily photographs or footage of the genocide. Right? In other words, we didn't invade Iraq to topple Saddam merely because we had photographs of the poison gas attack on the Kurdish villages. We would have still invaded Iraq and toppled Saddam just with eyewitness accounts of the killing of the Kurds. For example, eyewitness accounts from our own military and intelligence personnel.
I understand.
So since we've justified attacking other countries and toppling their governments based on allegations of genocide that aren't necessarily proven to that level of certainty that would require the coupling of firsthand testimony with dead bodies and photographs of the poison gas attacks on the Kurds, I would say we certainly can put Sasquatch on the endangered species list under a similar rationale. It's a lesser action by the government. Why wouldn't we use as low a standard of evidence as we have to invade countries as to save a fellow species?
So, on a similar note about classification, I'm very interested in the okay. So there was an Air Force physics textbook from the 1970s that claimed we had been visited by 57 extraterrestrial species, and you want to see a solid policy put into place that would cover how we as a country approach those species. Could you
Yeah,
elaborate?
I don't want to subject it to a plebiscite, but what I want is an open process where, let's say, the Senate Truth Commission or the Senate Space Commission would have open testimony where we discuss the fact that the different species that could be visiting us from deep space, even from our own solar system, could run the gamut from very benevolent to very malevolent, and in between, basically be neutral towards us. So that our policy shouldn't be, for example, always shooting down ET craft in our skies.
Mm-hmm.
It should be based on developing, for example, forms of intelligence and military technology to discern who we're dealing with and what's on their ships.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. So, and I would aver that somebody should consider my policy as meritorious, even if they want to be a skeptic and take the position that there's no proof that we're being visited by ET. It's still something that, if you assume arguendo or you agree with the round Earth conception of Earth and not the flat Earth,
mm-hmm.
Which I do. I'm a round Earther, even though I'm amenable to listening to the arguments of the flat Earthers.
Mm-hmm.
You have to acknowledge that means that every point on Earth is pointing out to the sky, to the heavens,
right,
to space, and therefore, as a spherical planet, we are an open planet, unless we were somehow to militarize all of the space above us, all of the sky above us, which I don't think necessarily would be a good thing. So that being the case, even if you don't believe in ET, I'm making an argument that an intelligent person should still consider. A person who loves the human race, who loves our planet, would seek to prevent it from being genocide or colonized or farmed, which would be to develop a contact policy that covers all of the above. We don't want to, for example, be shooting down benevolent species. Why would we want to be doing that?
Right.
At the same time, we wouldn't want to adhere to some airy-fairy space brother belief that would prevent us from an adequate or more than adequate military response to hostile ETs coming here.
What are some other examples of policy you think?
What would the policies be?
Or yeah, some other examples of like what policy you think we should have in this situation. Like one is, let's not just willy-nilly shoot down a flying craft.
Right. We would use military force when it was we should use lethal force against ET craft when they present a clear and present danger of immediate irreparable harm. Same standard again,
mm-hmm.
as for maintenance of state secrecy under FOIA and the other topic we discussed, which is to say that we should develop the ability to identify who's visiting us, and either, if we can't identify them, we would want to warn them off before shooting them down. If they were hostile and they were persisting on visiting us, and let's say abducting our people and subjecting them to live vivisection, there's some evidence that one or several ET species have actually done that, we would want to shoot them down as hostile invaders of our planet. If they wanted to colonize us, we should shoot them down. So if there's a valid rationale to protect human life or human liberty on this planet, we should shoot them down. If there's no evidence of that, we should warn them off or invite them into open contact. If, for example, we've been able to identify that a certain species is neutral or benevolent. But if there's a known malevolent species in terms of wanting to destroy us, eat us, colonize us, occupy our major cities or whatever, we would want to use the military, and space equipment that we've developed to protect our civilization from hostile aggression. I believe that that's legitimate. What I've learned from Bernard Mendez, one of my fellow jumpers who had much more liaison to ET than I did, is that most of the species coming here are benevolent, and that none of them, in fact, are even carnivores. So the stories about ETs coming here who could eat us are not supported by the evidence. So,
is there any other specifics you think that we should get out of the way as far as policy goes, aside from defense?
Yes, yeah. Since we were teaching about the dozens of types that were visiting us to our Air Force Academy pilot graduates, our Air Force Academy graduates who had gone to be pilots and officers in the U.S. Air Force after graduation, about the fact that we're being visited by ET. And since I was briefed about the 4 types that are visiting us frequently, when I was in the fourth grade. I think that transparency about ET and our contact policy should include giving the true information to adults and children that we're being visited by dozens of species. Some of them have been coming here since antiquity. Some have been coming here more recently after we began detonating nuclear weapons, and they detected our presence here because of the destructiveness of our nuclear devices or the sound or light of our devices. And yet there's no evidence that any of them are carnivores. So there's no evidence they're coming here to eat us or will eat us.
Mm-hmm.
But that just in terms of their plan of potentially colonizing us, that the different species that are coming here would fall in a range from malevolent through neutral to benevolent, but that the evidence is that most of them are honoring the prime directive and not grossly interfering in our civilization, and that some of them have entered into cooperative treaties with our civilization. I think all of that should be revealed to the people, including school children, because that's the natural history of the cosmos that we inhabit.
Mm-hmm.
In the same way that you wouldn't prevent a school child of a certain age from knowing that 71% of the earth is covered with water, or how pair bonding based reproduction occurs in higher organisms. At least by sixth grade, right? We give sex education to kids. You wouldn't want to prevent kids from knowing that they live in an inhabited universe. They have a right to know it, the nature of the universe they inhabit. So we have to stop lying to the people. We were supposed to be the flowering of the Enlightenment, not have a permanent secret government that would be perpetually lying to the people.
Mm-hmm.
We've lost our way, Rhett. That's why I'm running for president. We've lost our way.
So, next topic is transhumanism.
Yes.
So you are against transhumanism and want to protect the human rights of clones. And I'm unclear if you're saying that you want to ban artificial intelligence and other related technologies.
Well, that's a bit of a simplification. And that's a bit of a simplification when you say that I'm against transhumanism.
Uh-huh.
I'm not for or against transhumanism because the transhumanist technologies, cloning, microchipping, cognitive supplementation with digital devices to enhance human intelligence and human capability, microchipping for ID purposes, artificial intelligence, robotics, and so forth, advanced surveillance technology. Technology is always never good or bad. It's how it's used. I oppose dehumanizing uses of transhumanist technology. But I recognize that there are pro-social uses of transhumanist technology. For example, producing more capable people, including soldiers and thinkers, through physical and mental supplementation, or augmentation is a better term, may not only be laudable, but it may be necessary.
Mm-hmm.
So what I'm against is what I think we have to start doing is start saying, what are we actually doing here with this technology? And why would it be necessary? Let me give you one example. When Regina Dugan was either director of DARPA or had just left DARPA for Google, she being one of my former colleagues in the CIA's Mars Jumping program, and hence kind of a member of this insider kind of breakaway class that's developed in our country. She came out on behalf of virtually a universal application of microchipping. Hold on, closing the door here because somebody's mowing their lawn. Of microchipping, just because it could be done. So when she was being interviewed, she was saying, "Look at all the things we can do with this. We can, buy our groceries with the microchip. We can have the microchip be connected to GPS to find somebody when they're lost in the forest." And I thought, well, wait a minute. I think while all of us would agree, as Americans, let's say, of a Judeo-Christian country, or at least a country that was founded as such, that it would be a great thing to microchip adults, children, and pets so they could be found if lost. It's not such a great thing to make people parts of the commercial system where, Revelations 13 would come to pass, and we would all be microchipped and prevented from buying and selling goods in the economy if we weren't microchipped.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, as a Judeo-Christian country with tens and literally hundreds of millions of Christians, it certainly is a socially disruptive and irresponsible use of the technology to microchip people in fulfillment of Revelation 13, 16 through 18, to do that. So, but on the other hand, if everybody had like a little microchip placed in their wrist or the back of their neck or something, where they're completely benign to be sitting there, I think we would all agree that we should be microchipped, let's say, to be found if we die in some location where our body is not likely to be found, or we're lost, and our loved ones and law enforcement is looking for us. So that's the level of scrutiny that I'm asking for, which is to say that an advanced technology that alters the human form, that alters human personality and identity and dignity, shouldn't it be introduced just because it's available? It should be introduced if it can be introduced with no loss of human sanctity, dignity, individuality. That's what I'm saying. I'm not against transhumanist technology. I'll give you just one space example. The temperature of Venus at the surface is 600 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, there may be some kind of environment there that's not like the surface of the sun. It may be very hot, but still have some kind of terrestrial environment or aquatic environment that's that hot. If we're going to send space travelers to Venus, we're going to have to alter them. We're either going to have to use robots or cyborgs, or if we do use volitional, human astronauts, they're obviously going to have to be augmented to survive Venus.
Mm-hmm.
Probably the kind of spacesuits you would develop to survive 600 degrees Fahrenheit and the kind of decision-making people would have to do in that kind of hostile environment would involve the beneficial use of augmentation of the human brain through, cognitive supplementation of the human brain. So there may be situations where we'll have to use transhumanist approaches on a case-by-case basis. But that doesn't mean because the technology is available, you do it with everybody. The other, another implication of not thinking deeply before the introduction of policies or lack of policies involving transhumanist transhumanist initiatives is, for example, when people suggest, well, because you can clone somebody and that new human is just a carbon copy of the donor, the original person, you could then frame an ethical precept where you could harvest the necessary organs of the clone, effectively killing the clone, to extend the life or save the life of the host. Like, let's say, in the case of where the person needs a new liver.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the problem with that is if when we do the proper scientific and philosophical and ethical reasoning, a clone is simply an identical twin separated by time. It's somebody who's born of the same ovum, ultimately, on a delayed basis, but like an identical twin, there's a splitting of the fundamental genetics of the host, which could have occurred in utero, but is occurring in vitro as a result of the manipulation of reality that's cloning. That doesn't mean you should be able to suspend the civil rights of the clone, because a clone is still a human being. So that's all I'm saying, is we have to engage in the proper scientific, philosophical, and ethical reasoning to do the right thing with the transhumanist technologies.
Well, what about the ownership of a clone? Like, would you want policy?
That's another area. That's slavery. Because the clone is an identical twin separated simply by time, in the same way that let's say the older identical twin, or the more dominant, the identical twin possessed of a more dominant personality or brighter or whatever, is not allowed to enslave his lesser or her lesser identical twin. We can't allow a clone to be enslaved, because a clone is a human being.
Are there any other areas on cloning that you want policy, that this sort of preemptive policy?
Well, just a broad basic policy that a clone is